Never warm from my house.
Specifically for you. You may be a good person, but there's a lot of people in this world that aren't.
She's a woman who's been at the periphery of the investigation into child abusers Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt. Pam Botcher, Ruby's two middle daughters, were at her home on the day Ruby and Jodi were arrested back in August. We're breaking down Botcher's involvement in the case, her connection to Jodi and Ruby's life coaching company, and more details revealed in the newly released evidence dump. We break it all down with KUTV 2 News' Brian Schnee. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So most of us are still reeling from what we discovered in this trove of documents and videos and audio recordings released by Utah officials earlier this week. And it details Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt's abuse of Ruby's two youngest children, just 10, actually, I should say 9 and 12 years old during the summer of 2023. Only 2 of the children were at Jodi's residence, but Ruby has 6 children. Let's not forget that. The 2 oldest are both over 18. It's never been super clear where the 2 middle daughters were staying during this period because their dad, Kevin Franke, was estranged from the family at that point, as we've talked about before, not by his own doing. But in August, the 12-year-old son escaped from Jodi's home in Ivins, Utah, ran to a neighbor's home for help. He was emaciated, had duct tape on his wrists and ankles. Investigation that followed would end with Ruby and Jodi both taking plea deals, sent them to prison. The exact amount of time that they will serve will actually be up to the Board of Pardons and Paroles. But there have been so many developments, and I want to talk specifically about one person we haven't focused on enough, Pam Botcher. For that, I want to bring in one of our favorites. Always makes me smile. No, everybody loves him here. KUTV 2 News' reporter, anchor, Brian Schnee. Brian, good to see you. You're rocking an amazing jacket from the station. They don't even give me anything here from Law&Crime. I need a rain jacket. What am I doing wrong? But good to see you. First time we've spoken since the evidence has dropped. Let me just get your initial reaction to that.
Jesse, always great to talk to you, and we'll get you one of these jackets too, especially if we keep doing this. But,
yeah.
I had the opportunity to comb through a lot of that evidence as you probably have, and the folks at Law&Crime, and there's just so much in there. And there's so many avenues to this case that are beyond the surface level. And that is where so much of the coverage has been, is really at the surface, because we didn't have access to these videos, these pictures, which are horrific, and then the documents. And I think the journal is, of course, the most telling about the admission of guilt, the admission of abuse in writing. Detectives had this early on after they served the second search warrant. That is where they were able to gather the journal and other critical things. And that ultimately was the tall tale of, hey, we've got enough here to get these 2 women charged on second-degree felony child abuse charges here in the state of Utah, because it was all written down. And as damning as the body camera video is, and the photos, and the jail calls, the journal is where Ruby writes everything she did to these children over that 6-month span. So the officers had plenty to work with and ultimately share with the prosecution to move forward.
Not surprised they pled guilty after all this evidence. It would have been very, very tough to defend. All right, so the reason I wanted to talk to you specifically today was about someone we haven't talked a lot about, Pam Botcher. Now, first I want to say that she has never been accused of any crime connected to this case. She's never been charged. Her closeness, I should say, with both Ruby and Jodi has made people somewhat suspicious of her. Now, Botcher was involved in the Connexions business with Ruby and Jodi. There's this life coaching therapy business. Botcher listed on the website as president of Connexions, while Ruby was listed as a mental fitness trainer. And on the day that Jodi and Ruby were arrested in Ivins, Utah, August 30th, 2023, the middle children were with Pam Botcher and her husband more than 4 hours away in American Fork, Utah. We are going to get to that in a second. But before we even get to that, I want to actually start with when Pam's name was mentioned in these newly released materials. Now, you mentioned something to me about the journal entries. What did we learn from Ruby's journal entries with respect to Pam Botcher?
Well, Pam Botcher's not in there a lot, Jesse, but she is mentioned by name in the journal, specifically on July 15th, 2023. Before she mentions Pam's name, Ruby mentions going to bed after midnight with E sleeping on the floor next to the bed and R on the patio outside of the sliding window, sleeping outside, Jesse. First step, right? You read just one line of this journal and you're like, whoa, there's part of the abuse, mental or physical. The next line mentions Pam on that date. And it does say what we already knew about Pam. Pam was taking care of the two daughters, in essence of being kind of a liaison between mom and the two daughters as they lived out of that Springville home with mom not around a whole lot. And the mention there is Ruby wondering if Pam was able to take one of her children to take her ACT test. And it was on that day that they first mentioned Pam Botcher. Now, I believe Pam was also one of the people that called Ruby in jail. And the reason why I believe that, because it's not written out in those jail calls, at least from where I found, and there's so much evidence, I could have missed it. But when I was speaking with one of the detectives earlier this week, she mentioned screening a call between Pam and Ruby in jail. So there is a connection there. Remember back when we got that American Fork body camera video from Pam's home? And Pam, in a way, said, I'm not that close to Ruby, but her children were there. We did know from talking to Jodi Hildebrandt a long time ago. They told me Pam was always around Jodi's home. That was back when Jesse was living with Jodi, tried to leave, endured her own abuse, shared that abuse with us, myself at KUTV 2 News and also Law&Crime, and really had that story told. So Pam is involved, but Pam was never charged.
So let's go into now the Kevin Franke interview, the audio interview. So this was 2 weeks, I believe, after his initial interview. Very different than his first interview where he was almost caught off guard, somewhat defensive of Ruby and Jodi. But then he switched gears and he talks about a lot of the weird things that he was noticing. So let's play this where he mentions Pam Botcher.
And it had engraved on the leather on the outside the pen papers, and Ruby wrote detailed notes of everything, all interactions with Jodi and Pam Botcher from August 2021 until I don't know when. These things are going to be so. She wouldn't write the stuff she wrote in the pen paper. She would not write in her journal. The stuff she wrote in the pen papers was not intended to be read by anybody until God would decree them to be written as scripture for the whole world to read. So it described all of the visions and trances and everything that Jodi and Ruby went into.
How thick would you say it was?
It was like 3 inches thick or so. And there were hundreds of pages of written documents that Ruby had. If you're interested in Pam Botcher, that's going to tie Pam Botcher to all of this. What's in those documents?
Brian, I throw it to you. What is he referring to, and what do you make it? What do you make of it?
Well, I make of it that a lot of us thought Pam had a true involvement in the abuse of the children. However, when I spoke with a detective on Monday, March 25th, just days before you and I are having this conversation, I asked her point blank, where did Pam Botcher fit into all of this? She told me, quote, Pam was a suspect. Right out of the gate, Pam was a suspect. The phone calls that she screened between Pam and Ruby they were trying to find a link that Pam had been in Jodi's home, that Pam knew about abuse, but they couldn't find it. They couldn't find a direct link that Pam had been there in that 6-month time frame and that she knew about those children being abused. It was never mentioned in those calls, and it wasn't mentioned in the journal. So what I learned is that they were trying to draw a connection to Pam. Just like all of us, knowing there's a third member of Connections Classroom, the president of the 501c3 Connections Foundation, Pam Botcher, and where 2 middle children belonging to the Frankes were found the day of the arrest. But it turns out they couldn't connect her to anything, at least pertaining to this. Now, I did learn that they were able to have at least some sort of an attempted dialogue with Pam. This would be investigators, but then she quickly lawyered up. So that stopped. But at the end of our conversation with Detective Jessica Bate, who was seen in these body camera videos, who really led this investigation and coordinated the boots on the ground in Jodi Hildebrandt's home, she told me they didn't find anything involving Pam in the home or having any knowledge of the abuse of the children. Regardless of what was played in that audio, investigators could not find it. Therefore, Pam, as we sit here today, is not a suspect anymore after being an initial suspect and was never charged. So could there be more with Pam in the future? Potentially, but it wouldn't be with the Santa Clara Ibans Police Department. So now we'll just have to see if that ever comes back into light and comes back to fruition as it pertains to this case. But yes, they were friends. And there were those deeply rooted conversations, Jesse. And yeah. I don't believe we are ever going to see those papers. I don't know where they are. I haven't seen them. I don't know if they were not released and they weren't part of an evidence. But at the end of the day, it sounds like all of those papers, like much of the journal, had thoughts and written dialogue of deeply rooted religious extremism.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because going back to Kevin, according to him, there was a very supernatural element to when it came to Jodi Hildebrandt. And he would talk about how when she was around her, things were very weird. And he mentions Pam in this. Let's play this now.
And it turned into just like crazy house. The moment she showed up in my house, just the weirdest crap started happening. Lights turning on and off, sounds of people walking in walls, and like sounds like footprints going up walls and across the ceiling, and like stuff floating around, and it was just, it was weird, and I hated it. And Ruby would go up and check on her. It started like every 4 hours at night, and then it moved every 2 hours at night, then it moved every hour at night, and then at some point Ruby said, you know what, I'm just going to start sleeping in there, and if I need you, I'll come down and get you. I'm like, that's kind of weird, but okay. And that was that. They started sleeping in the same bed, and then she started having like trances and stuff. I would say probably September, where she believed that she was going to heaven and seeing God and Jesus and talking with them. And she would get together with Pam Botcher. Ruby, Pam, and Jodi would get together and do these interventions. That's what they called them. And so they'd just go up and lock themselves in a room for 4 or 5 hours, and then they'd come out and they'd all just be on cloud nine, and Ruby would share with me like she had this amazing vision, and I wrote it and recorded it all down, and we have a work to do from God, and you're part of it, and the bishop's part of it, and we're all part of bringing all this stuff to the world. And so it was, and it continued like that until I wanted to move on with life.
That was some of the most remarkable points about that. But you hear Tim talking about Pam connected to this. What were your thoughts on it?
I wasn't surprised to hear that Pam and Ruby and Jodi had involvement in some of the spiritual stuff. And I'm obviously saying it lightly because it's so deep and so beyond me that it's hard to even comprehend some of the things that Kevin just mentioned there, at least for me. I mean, this is not something that I have a deep understanding in religious extremism or going far off and beyond general scripture and what's taught, in certain religions. So hearing that, I guess I wasn't surprised that they had these moments though. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about the children, that call doesn't mention anything about Pam working with E or R on certain things, or even the middle children or anything like that. It's strictly rooted as the members of Connection. And we know that they were all involved in these speaking engagements, and obviously what Connexions was, the life coaching aspect of things, or marital counseling, or whatever they wanted to call it. Doesn't surprise me that there were those moments where Ruby and Jodi and Pam were all together off doing whatever that was just described to be, I'm not surprised, Jesse. I think it's more than anything, it's heartbreaking to hear Kevin have to recount a lot of that, because you feel the moments of when his relationship deteriorated at the hands of Jodi, getting to Ruby. Pam is also there. And ultimately, he's a father of 6 kids, and his life is being ripped apart slowly and surely. You mentioned the progression, checking in 4 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, sleeping together in the same bed.
Yeah.
And then Pam comes into play here, and they have these group chats. It made me, listening to Kevin, and obviously the initial thought of where is Kevin in all of this, I felt for the guy. I mean, just as a dad, I mean, as a parent, I felt for him being so out of the loop and not understanding. It made me wonder if there was an opportunity for him to dig more and learn more about this, or if he felt like this is beyond me and we've already lost it.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. So for anybody who's still suspicious of Kevin Franke, it's your right to be suspicious. I was suspicious when I first heard the story. How could he not know what was happening to his kids? How could he not know what was happening to his wife? I encourage everybody to listen to this whole full police interview, and you will get a very interesting perspective about where he was coming from. And obviously, look, it's his account. Is he telling the truth? Is he not? That'll be for people to judge, but I think it was a very enlightening interview. But going back to Pam Botcher, we mentioned it before. Let's play a little bit of it now. When she had Ruby's children with her, when Ruby was arrested, we go back to these multiple agencies. They were scrambling to find these middle children. The investigation revealed that Botcher had picked up one of the girls at a rec center, so officers were dispatched to keep the situation under control until the Department of Children and Family Services got there. This is from the Bodycam officers going to this house in American Fork, Utah.
How's it going?
Good.
I'm Officer Hawkins, sir. I'm looking for Pam. Is Pam in today?
Yeah, that's my wife.
Is your wife? She's here.
Hi.
Hello, Pam. How are you doing?
Good.
I'm Officer Hawkins, American Fork Police Department.
Hi.
So we had a agency assist out of St. George in Springville that we're just looking for. Okay. When you picked her up, what was the case? Did somebody ask you to pick her up, or did you just pick her up? What was going on?
Well, I'm having guests coming, and she came and did some cleaning for me.
Some cleaning for you?
You work right now in the house?
In the living room right here.
Okay, great. We're gonna have both of you come out here then.
If you can, just for a second, we just have to go over some stuff.
You have a warrant?
Yeah, we do.
Let me see it, please.
So it's in my car, but right now my concern is.
Will you just tell them you're all right?
Well, we
Yeah.
have to physically see her.
Come to that doorway.
We'll go ahead and get the copy of the warrant for you, okay?
You have a warrant for my house?
Specifically for you.
For you and the child.
Yeah. Okay. So
What is going on?
as of right now, I'll just need you to give your phone to your husband.
Okay.
Okay. And as of this moment, you're going to be detained right now. Okay.
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 So what
is
does that mean?
there anything on you?
No.
Okay, perfect. Just put your hands in front of you, okay? Just gonna place you temporarily under arrest. Okay? I'll explain to you that.
What are you guys doing?
I've explained this already. I'm being as courteous as I can.
Okay, well, I'm going to call an attorney.
That's fine.
I don't know what's
Yeah,
going
I don't even
on.
know what this is all about.
Okay. So I'm
Put
gonna
my
explain
wife
to you
in
when we get to the car.
handcuffs, I mean-
Yes, I just explained to you that you're being detained right now.
And obviously, this body cam goes on a lot more. She talks about how she picked the kids up. She brought them over. They were going to be cleaning the house because they had company coming over from Costa Rica. Pam's husband, quite resistant to law enforcement, because they even said at one point, "Why don't you come down? I want to talk to you in private, not in front of the children." And he's like, "No. I want to be an eye shot of her. I want to see where she is. I don't know who you guys are. I don't know what's happening. I don't want Springville coming up and sweeping her away. I feel sort of responsible for her." It was such a fascinating back and forth. Kind of give everybody. I think you and I actually talked about this previously. We've done shows on it before. But just overall, knowing what you know now from the document release, going back to watching this body cam, what's your take?
Well, I think from the get-go, when we talked about this, I thought it was really interesting how the dialogue between Pam and the DCFS worker and other officers, after she was confused, by the way, because officers got this really wrong in the situation. They were completely mixed up on who they were looking for, because it was, one agency to another. I mean, hundreds of miles of span. they were confused, and rightfully so. I don't know if the right information was relayed to them to share with Pam, or if they just got it wrong. But after Pam was confused and her husband Roy was confused, I don't blame Roy for being a little bit weary, by the way. That's kind of a husband mentality, right? You would hope that your partner in life is gonna stick up for their guns and stick to what they believe in here and want to see the warrant. And ultimately, they didn't present a warrant, so it made things really complicated. But after obviously learning more about what officers were looking into Pam for, and then seeing this, I still think the dialogue between Pam and the DCFS worker and the other officer really kind of backing down and away from the relationship that she and Ruby have. She did mention they've only known each other for a few years. I do believe that to be accurate based on the time frame of what we heard from Kevin and other accounts. But at the same time, what we learn in this journal, July 15th, 2023, Pam was supposed to take one of those kids to their ACT test. This was not the first time they were going to Pam's house to do cleaning because she has guests in town from Costa Rica. This was a more regular thing than what it was made to believe from that initial interaction. So we do know that they had an ongoing relationship, probably as long as that time frame of when Ruby was at Jodi Hildebrandt's home. So the journal giving us a better time frame of where this video comes into play about a month and a half later, there's a good chance that Pam has seen those children specifically dozens of times between that journal entry and when officers came to their home. So was it surprising in any way to look back at this and say, nothing was surprising? I just think from the get-go, Jesse, we were confused as to why Pam wasn't a little bit more forthcoming about her relationship with Ruby and why those children were really at her house. She left a lot of pieces out that day.
And maybe we're starting to fill in some of those pieces. Brian Schnee, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Love having your perspective. Great reporting as always throughout all of this. And obviously we'll stay in touch as this case, probably not the last time we heard about it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on this episode of Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.